Hey everybody, this is Lewis, and I just wanted to do a quick rundown of my Varroa management plan for 2019. Just talk about what I did during the season and my results so far. The biggest part of my plan was a lot of monitoring. So I monitored it 6 times during the season, and this is just kind of some basic statistics from all that monitoring. And so we have the mean, median, mode, min, and max for each of the monitoring periods. So I've monitored 6 different times during the season. So this blue is February 24th, the gray is 24th of April, the blue is June 4th, this is July 21st, September 17th, and October 21st. And so I'm going to go through each of those monitoring periods and talk more about what I did and what I saw at each of those monitorings. I started my monitoring at the end of February. I didn't have much of a winter here in Rutherfordton, and the bees were building up in January, and I had plenty of good, strong colonies in late February. And so I started my uh, monitoring right there. I didn't monitor everybody. I did have some weak colonies that needed a little boost, and they did not get monitored here, but I did monitor 21 colonies. Um, so the number that I monitored is 21. The mean or the average infestation rate, so mites per 100 bees in February was 0.83 mites per 100 bees. The median, these numbers are ranked from high to low, and I had 21 samples. 0.33 is a number in the middle right here. So I have 10 that are higher than 0.33 and I have 10 that are lower than 0.33. Median is that number that's in the middle. Mode is the number that happens most often. So 0 is the number that we found most often. So that's mean is the average, median is the number in the middle, and mode is the number that happens most often. And of course, the minimum number was 0, the maximum was 4.88%, so almost 5% infestation in February, which that is too high. Um, so my takeaway from that monitoring in February was monitor all your colonies and catch those outliers. I know that a lot of beekeepers, if they monitor, they don't monitor until they get to August, September, October. And I kind of look back at my February monitoring and say, what would have happened if I had not caught that colony that was at 5% in February until September? That would have been a really a ticking time bomb, I think, for my apiary and for other apiaries in the neighborhood. So that was it was important to catch that. My threshold for this monitoring was 0.8% or just a little less than 1%. So anything above 0.8%. So these were treated with Apivar right after the monitoring. Um, I didn't treat anybody below, so I only treated those that were above that threshold. Next monitoring, April, I had 22 colonies that I monitored. So colonies, I think everybody was up and running at this point. I did have some uh, mating nukes, so there were more colonies in the apiary. I didn't monitor everyone if they were in the middle of a queen event, so either a mating nuke or were making a new queen for whatever reason. They didn't get sampled, but I did sample 22 in April. And I also kind of think of this as a post-treatment monitoring for those that received Apivar in February. My threshold was for this. Well, let's talk about what my what the stats look like. The mean was 0.16 mites per 100 bees. That's very good. The median, the number in the middle, was 0. The mode was 0, and the min was 0, and the max was 1.58. So things are looking really good at this April monitoring. So that was nice to see. The post-treatment monitoring showed that the treatments from February were effective, so that was good to see. My my threshold at this monitoring was 2%, and nobody met that threshold, so I didn't have to do anything. So nobody got treated in April. June 4th, early June, we monitored 27 colonies. Again, there were more colonies in the apiary. Only monitored those that were queen right at the time. The average was 0.85% infestation, or 0.85 mites per 100 bees. The median number was 0.67, or 2/3 of a mite per 100 bees. The mode, the number that happened most often, was 0.33. The minimum was 0, and the max was almost 5%. So almost 15 mites in my 300 bee sample. My threshold at this monitoring was 1.6%, so anything above 1.6% did get a treatment. They got mite away quick strips here. I guess the takeaway from this one was stay on it, keep monitoring every 4 to 6 weeks, because things do change, and it's important to know what's going on so you can make good decisions. July 21st, I had 33 colonies that I monitored. I think there were probably more mating nukes in the yard that didn't get monitored, but we monitored 33 at this one. This is my pre-treatment monitoring, so everybody's going to get treated in late July and early August, but this is my pre-treatment to see how things are looking before I put that treatment in. And you can see things are kind of moving up. Numbers are moving up. The average was 1.67% infestation, or almost 2 mites per 100 bees. The median was 2 mites per 100 bees. The number that happened most often was 1%. And our minimum, again, was 0, and our max was 8%. So that is 24 mites in my 300 bee sample. So we had 2 of those. So look at these at the top here. Mite numbers are really climbing there in late July. I've got, so my threshold is 3%, and probably 1/3 of the colonies or better are above my threshold. But my threshold for this monitoring is 0%. Everybody in late July, early August gets treated, just because I know what happens to our mite numbers in August and September. They really go through the roof, sometimes even with the treatment, and certainly a lot of times without a treatment, things just really go crazy. So everyone received Apivar here. The takeaway: mites explode at the end of summer, early fall, so try to stay ahead of them. September 17th was my post-treatment monitoring to see how things looked after I treated. I monitored 31 colonies. The average was 0.01%, so almost 0, which was great to see. The median was 0, the mode was 0, the minimum was 0, the max mites per 100 bees 2, and only had 1 there. So I was very pleased with my treatment. It worked really well. So I think I have 24 colonies with no mites. I had 1 at 2%, 1 at 1%, and several at less than 1%. Very pleased. Post-treatment monitoring confirms that the treatment was effective. Now, that's not always the case. It worked out good for me, but I would encourage you to please do not think of treatments as a silver bullet. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and monitor to see where you stand. I was lucky. Uh, Things worked really well for me. Um, doesn't mean it's gonna work like that again for me next year, but it did work for me well this year. This is my end of season monitoring. Put things to bed for the winter. Everybody's fed up. I got good. I mean, they have feed on them. They're all heavy. I got good bee populations, so I wanted to double check and make sure my mites were still in control. I monitored 28 colonies. I think I monitored 30. I think I'm missing two numbers, but they were low. The average was zero point 0.3, so the average is still nice and low. The median is 0.33. The mode is 0. The minimum is 0, but the max is 6.33%. And so these two colonies, they were at 0% at my post-treatment. They had no mites in them at my post-treatment. And this one all of a sudden has 19 mites per 300 bees, and this one has 14 mites per 100 bees. So I thought that was very interesting. So I think I went ahead and I was going to use oxalic acid because I didn't have a lot of capped brood, so that would have been a good treatment. And then I thought I kind of slept on that for a few days and decided to go back with more Apivar just because I want to do a test to see if um, the if my mites will be killed by Apivar. So I do not think that so where do these mites come from? The different options are they were in the cat brood during my post-treatment monitoring. That's one possibility. Another possibility is there are colonies around me crashing and throwing off mite-infested bees, and they're coming into my colonies with their mites. The third option, I think, is there are colonies crashing in my neighborhood, and my bees are out there robbing those crashing colonies and picking up the mites. And so personally, I think that I got a good, effective treatment with Apivar, and I think these mites are coming from somewhere outside. So I'll kind of confirm that if I go back and do some post-treatment monitoring on these two colonies in a few weeks, and we see that these numbers have come down. If they're still high, then that would indicate that maybe my um, mites aren't responding well to the Apivar anymore. So we'll see how that plays out. Uh, the bottom line, end of season monitoring is important. Just because things look good at the end of September, that doesn't mean that they're going to look good at the end of October or early November. And you really need to make sure that things are good. I guess the other takeaway is um, simply spot checking a few hives in your apiary is may not be sufficient. If I had only let's say I even sampled half of my colonies, there's a pretty good chance I would have missed these two outliers that were at above 5% or at or above 5%. So it's really important to, I think, do the work and sample everybody and see what's going on. All right, so the most interesting statistic when I started looking at it, I think, was median. So that number that kind of fell in the middle, when we ranked them from high to low, and we kind of watched that median climb through the season. So this was that February. In April, I treated the highest one, so we brought that median back to 0. It climbed back up into the late summer. I did the application of Apivar here, brought the median back to 0, and then we saw it kind of bump up a little again there at the end. So that was, I think, watching that median was interesting to me. All right, going back to that original chart that we showed to kick this off, this red line here represents the economic threshold. So this is the line, you want to keep your mites below 3% or below 3 mites per 100 bees at all times, the best you can. And I felt like the monitoring really helped me do that during the season. The average, or the mean, never got above 3%. Although on the max, I did have some colonies that did blow through the economic threshold, but I was able to catch them and bring them back down, hopefully. So we'll still see about these two over here that were above the threshold, but I think we'll have handled those. And so I think that monitoring can really make the difference between success and failure in beekeeping. And so that's really what I wanted to look at with all this monitoring this season. Remember, with the treatments, 1/3 of the time they work as planned. So you have a high mite load, you apply a treatment, and then you have a low mite load. And that mostly that is, I'd say I did better than 1/3. Most of my colonies did respond well to treatment. 1/3 of the time they work, but might spike. So you have a high mite load, you apply a treatment, then you have a low mite load, but then you come back 2 to 4 weeks later and your mites are back out of control. And I definitely saw that in 2 colonies at the end of the season. And overall, 1/3 of the time treatments just fail. So you have a high mite load, you apply a treatment, and at the end of the treatment you still have a high mite load. Fortunately, that I didn't wind up in that category with any of my colonies this time. But I think this is a pretty good description of what we see with the different treatments. I've seen all of them work. I've seen all of them fail, and I think it just underscores the importance of monitoring to make sure that you're keeping things in control. If anybody's interested in my numbers, I have a spreadsheet that has the results from each monitoring by date, and you're certainly welcome to play with those numbers or to double check my statistics or whatever you want to do. Especially, I'm really interested to hear about your monitoring program, how your monitoring went, and I'm also interested to hear from people who think that monitoring is of no value. If you want to, I haven't heard anyone make a good argument that monitoring is bad. I think it does involve some work, but it really does pay dividends. So that's my takeaway message. All right, so just to wrap it up, I have about 30 colonies, and I've put them to bed for winter. I'm not losing any sleep about whether they're going to be there or not when I come back in February. I am confident that they will be there because I've done a pretty good job of dealing with my mites this year. And so I may lose 10 or 15% of my colonies just to regular old bee stuff, failed queen. I might mess up on my feeding, and I might have a colony starve to death, or things happen. So I feel like if I can keep my losses to 10 or 15%, that that doesn't really bother me, and I feel like um, I shouldn't have any problem. I don't feel like I'm going to lose any colonies to mites over the season. So I think that's the most important part. So hope you guys are able to get a little something out of this, and certainly welcome your questions and comments. Thanks.